Welcome to Impact Church. For service times, upcoming events, and video podcasts, please visit our website, www.impactchurchohio.com.
So we're in week 2 of this series we're calling What's This Life For? And we're looking at some of life's deepest questions with our fancy graphic with the hourglass. You gotta put that together. You know, time is ticking. And so we've talked about some of these questions. What is life for? What does this all mean? Does it even matter anyway? I mean, what's the point? Maybe like me, you don't ask these questions all the time, right? You don't live your life in this sort of ecclesiastical mindset where you're just like, man, what is the purpose all the time? Depressed and angry and frustrated like the author is. But I think each of us have these times and these opportunities where we're a little bit more sensitive to those questions, or where they're a little bit more on our mind. Maybe when you hit hard times or trials or struggles or tragedy in your life, maybe when you have a transition like a move, or maybe a kid going to high school or college, these things bring up, and in those moments you're hit with these deeper questions of life. Most of the time I think they're sort of below the surface. Like, we don't often think about, what does life really mean? But in those moments where it does hit us, we can find ourselves in a bit of a funk, right? Maybe this week you guys were following the news. You saw how many people, Vice President Joe Biden's son, Beau Biden, which the only reason I remember his name is because they rhyme, fun fact. He passed away, though. Very tragic story. And Beau Biden, he was a politician as well, had struggled with brain cancer for a couple years and recently passed away. But it gave an interesting opportunity, a unique opportunity, where President Obama was delivering a eulogy for a funeral, which probably happens more often than I'm aware of. But I happened to come across these powerful and relevant words that stood out, probably because we're in a series on Ecclesiastes, right? And I want to read this for you now. Obama said, and I tried to practice like my Obama timing and stuff, and the iPad's kind of like a teleprompter, but I just couldn't get it. So I'll take long dramatic pauses and do this. We do not know how long we've got here. We don't know when fate will intervene. We cannot discern God's plan. What we do know is that with every minute that we've got, we can live our lives in a way that takes nothing for granted. We can love deeply. We can help people who need help. We can teach our children what matters. And we can pass on empathy and compassion and selfishness. We can teach them to have broad shoulders. Whatever your feelings are on the president, man, that is a good eulogy. Like, I'm going to steal that and use that for somebody, because there's just something about death it's this great equalizer. We all go through our lives at 60 miles an hour, 70 miles an hour, 80 miles an hour, and maybe we never think about it. We never think about our mortality. But when somebody we love, or somebody who's even on the national scene, dies, it gives us an opportunity to reflect. It gives us an opportunity to look at ourselves and think about words. I mean, really, we just go through life thinking we're invincible. Everybody dies. It is 100%. 100% of you guys one day are going to wake up on the wrong side of the dirt. But until then, it is a good day. Any day you wake up on the right side of the dirt. And we don't think about it. But when we're in the shadow of death, we have the opportunity to gain a fresh sense of perspective. And so Ecclesiastes is a book largely about that sense of perspective. As he goes through, the author is reflecting. He's passing on wisdom from his life. And really you get the sense that he's an older gentleman who says, you know what, I'm dying. My time on this earth will not be long, and I've had a good life. I've had a long life. But you know what? I've been to some funerals of people, and they had good lives too. They had long lives too. But the sad thing about that is most of us die, and people don't care. We die, and maybe your family will cry, and they'll send some flowers, and they'll go to the funeral. But how many people have the sort of impact that leaves a legacy? That people remember, that people learn from, that people are inspired to be better men and women because of. And so the author of Ecclesiastes, he says, you know what, as I'm reflecting back, I want to pass on some of my wisdom because I have made every mistake in the book. I've screwed up in more ways than I've got right. And if there's anything that I can do to help you experience less struggle, that's what I want to do. Last week we looked at chapter 1, book of Ecclesiastes, and we determined that in chapter 1, the author's goal as he was writing was essentially to depress us. It was very depressing, and I'm just going to be honest with you. If this was your scenario too, I apologize. I'm a bad pastor. I'll make it up to you somehow, hopefully by the Cavs winning. But I went home after last weekend and speaking on chapter 1 of Ecclesiastes, and I was depressed for like 48 hours afterwards. Like Monday, I didn't get out of my house. I was just like, you know what, I'm taking a day. I just feel like, I don't know. I don't know. I felt really depressed, and legitimately, after speaking on that passage, it was so heavy, and maybe there's something about if you say meaninglessness enough, like there's power in that word, and it just sort of sucked the life out of me for a couple of days. So I hope it was encouraging for you guys, but as the speaker, I was like, this is depressing. And so the author of Ecclesiastes, he did that very intentionally, though, because he was painting a picture that was so bleak that the reader, that you and I, have nothing left to conclude from chapter 1 of Ecclesiastes than, is there anything more? Like, is there any hope at all? Because he just goes through and he says, vanity, vanity, all is vanity. Everything under the sun is meaningless. It's empty. What's the point? What is this life for? And I said the one sort of nugget of hope in that chapter is that he says everything under the sun is meaningless, but throughout the book he'll point to something that's outside of the sun, something that's greater than what we can see, something that's greater than what we experience on a daily basis, and something that can give us hope. And so his goal was to begin this process of perspective in our own lives and to take us on this journey. And like any good journey, the author of Ecclesiastes was defining our current reality. He was looking at life as it is and saying, look, we've got to look at where we're at. The Cavaliers last year, I'm going to be in basketball mode, right? I'm excited. The Cavaliers last year, at a certain point, they had to look at their roster and assess honestly where they were. Because you can't get from where you are to where you want to go if you don't know where you're starting. So at some point, David Griffin, he's the GM. Yes, David Griffin, the GM. They had to look at it and say, you know what? If we want to get to the finals next year, we need LeBron James. Bury the hatchet, pay the man whatever he needs, get him back, because we want to go there and we can't do it with what we're currently operating with. So they swallowed their pride and they took an honest look at where they were at and they made changes to get where they wanted to be. That's the first slide, actually. To get from where you are to where you want to be, you need to first define your current reality. So the preacher in Ecclesiastes, he says this. He says, I don't know what this life is for. There are times it just seems so bleak. It seems so empty and meaningless and depressing. But here's what I'm going to do. I've got an idea. He has this light bulb moment, and he says, I'm going to test myself with pleasure. I enjoy pleasure as much as the next man, and so maybe if I just had more pleasure in my life, that would do it. I think he probably wrote chapter 1 and felt a little depressed himself and was like, I'm going to pick myself up. This is what I'm going to do. I need something. Have you ever been there? You're just in a funk, and you feel depressed, and you think, you know what? Life is not going the way I wanted it to right now. This is terrible. Like, I didn't see my 30s or my 40s or my 50s working out like this. I thought I would be there, and I'm here. And maybe that new Avengers movie will make me feel better. Maybe it'll snap me out of it. And, God is gracious. Sometimes that works. But there are other times in life where those measures that we can do on our own don't work. And you're just in a funk. You can't get out of it. You can't change. So he says to himself, I'm going to test myself with pleasure. If you would turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 2, it's on page 356. As we go a little deeper, the author, who actually go a little deeper himself, he tries pleasure initially, but then he goes into sort of substance abuse. He tries drugs and alcohol. He tries sex, and he says, man, what can I do to fill this longing in my life? What can I do to fill this hole that's within me, this void and these questions? How can I appease my spirit? In verse number 1, he says, I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself. But behold, this also was vanity. Now, he's not a very good author in this case, because he's not really burying the lead. He kind of gives it away right there. He says, I'm going to test myself with pleasure, but this too is vanity. And then he says in verse 2, I said of laughter, it's mad, and of pleasure, what use is it? I searched with my heart how to cheer my body with wine, my heart still guiding me with wisdom, and how to lay hold of folly, till I might see what was good for the children of man to do under heaven during the few days of their life. He had this longing. He had this feeling deep within inside him, this desire that he could not meet. And so as he's testing himself, he says, maybe if I'll just hang out with jesters and funny people, and they're always laughing all the time, maybe that'll rub off, and that'll be what I need, and that'll cheer me up. And you say, I'm going to go out with this outgoing person, and it'll be fun. It'll be great. It'll cheer me up. It'll pick up my spirits. But he said it's madness. It's not, it didn't work long term. Oh, then he goes on to drugs and alcohol to numb the pain, to drink it away. Many of us have, at various points in our lives, probably tried this path. You feel sad, you feel depressed, you feel angry or lonely, whatever it might be. And you think, maybe alcohol is the solution. Maybe I can drink away my problems. And if you've experienced that, there's a little bit of truth to that, right? For like a season, a moment, a couple of hours, you feel almost better. You forget about the pain that you were living with, and it numbs it. But then typically the next day you wake up and you feel twice as bad as when you started. And in fact, alcohol has been around for a long time, right? Since Genesis chapter 9, Noah gets off the boat, like 2 days off of the boat, and he says, you know what would be good right now? I just saw a lot of people die, and I'm kind of lonely. Like I had some friends, and now they're dead. I'm gonna get drunk. I think that'll make me feel better. It'll cheer me up, and I'll be like, oh, look, I'm drunk. And so Noah does. Genesis chapter 9, people have been trying to fill the emptiness, the unhappiness, the loneliness in their life with alcohol for thousands and thousands and millions. I don't know how you do the math on that. Ask Ken Ham or something, okay? For a long, long time. And if you look around our community, if you look around Lakewood, man, there are a lot of people still trying it. There are a lot of people who live with this dull aching in their lives, and the only escape they can find is to get drunk, to forget it, to live for the weekend and throw caution to the wind. But then you have these conversations, and there are moments where you can just see in their eye that something is not right. You can just see that they are living with this quiet sense of desperation deep beneath it all. And to be honest, within a crowd, even of this size, there are probably some people in here who are living a lifestyle like this. And it's unfortunate. I hope that you have experienced, I hope that you'll find through the wisdom of Ecclesiastes that, man, there are other paths, there are better ways, and I hope that Impact Church is the type of place where we can have the authenticity, not to live behind the shadows and not to practice this dualistic life, but to say, you know what, I struggle. I numb the pain. I take pills. I drink. I do drugs. Not me personally, but maybe, because until it comes into community, until it comes into light, there's no healing. And if we're just lying to ourselves, if we're just going through life numbing the pain and numbing the world around us, there can be no progress without defining our current reality. Now, the author will go on. He says, look, drugs are not the solution to the problems of life. It masks them temporarily, but it doesn't solve them. I've tried that. I've been there, done that, bought the t-shirt, whatever. So he moves on in verse 4 and says, you know what I'm going to try now? I'm going to try accomplishment. Try that. He says, so I made great works. I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens and parks and planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself pools from which to water the forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had slaves who were born in my house. I had also, fun fact, slaves born in your house were a little bit better because they were more loyal to you back in the day. And the Bible is not condoning slavery, but it is sort of recording a historical time where slavery was okay, just in case any roadblocks went up for you. And he says, I had also great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any who had been before me in Jerusalem. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. I got singers, both men and women, and many, many concubines, the delight of the sons of man. Don't miss that. Some people read the Bible with rose-colored lenses here. Many, many concubines. This guy was with whomever he wanted, whenever he wanted. He was sowing his oats. He was living it up. He was trying everything. He was pursuing pleasure to find his happiness. And so he says, so I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. All my wisdom remained with me, and whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. Have any of you ever tried to live like that? Have you ever gone through a season where you said, you know what? You only live once. I'm going to do it. Like, I have everything I need, and if there's something that I want, I'm just going to take it. I'm just going to get it. I'm just going to throw caution to the wind. And, you know, we say this in America, like it's better to burn out than to fade away. Or you hear people say the goal of life isn't to arrive safely in the end, but to throw caution to the wind and slide in. I'm messing up the metaphor. Have you guys heard this? Yeah. There's like, you want to arrive screeching and in a ball of fire at your funeral. That's a reality that people live with. And that's how some people approach life. They say, you know what? You only get one shot at this thing, and I'm going to go all out. Throw caution to the wind. I would say, honestly, just kind of thinking about this passage and looking at it, in terms of America, I think, honestly, most of us are kind of living our lives like this. Even if we're Christ followers, even if we follow Jesus, even if we participate in the church or read our Bible or try to be more like Jesus, I think a lot of it just culturally, because we live in America, we really pursue every whim and desire that we have. I'm not a wealthy man by many stretches of the imagination. On a worldly standpoint, I am the 1% because I was born in America. I won the birth jackpot, okay, like most of you. But outside of those standards, I am not a wealthy man. And here's what I was thinking. There are not many things that I come upon that I don't get. Like, if I want something, if I desire it, I will work for it. I will get it. I will buy it. I might have to, maybe I have to budget or pinch pennies or save or skip some lattes or something. But there comes a point where I fulfill pretty much every desire of my heart. And I look around at most people in America, the people in this room, and I think many of you are in that same situation. Many of you would say, man, I might have to put it off for 6 months. I might have to ask my wealthy uncle or aunt to get it for me for Christmas. But, I can get it if I need to. I can get it if I want it. I can fulfill those desires and needs. And so we don't have the money that the author had, but we're sort of in the same situation where we're just fulfilling our needs. And many times, I think we have the same beliefs as him. We think that stuff will satisfy us. And it's not a question of whether we believe that stuff will satisfy us, because most of us would probably justify, if we're honest, and say, it's not that we don't believe stuff will satisfy us. We just think that we don't have enough stuff. Like, I ultimately, at the end of the day, a lot of times, I think stuff will satisfy me. I just need more stuff. Like, if I had LeBron James stuff, I'm pretty sure I'd be satisfied. Living with Ryan, pastoring a church stuff, maybe not. Maybe there's some, stuff that you'd want. But if you had the means to get more stuff, don't you think there's a place where you're like, I could do this? If I just made $250 a year, I could buy happiness. I've seen places and people that look happy to me, and I think I could do it on a better budget than they do. Like, I don't need all of that. I think I could do it. And the author, he just says that stuff will not satisfy. That trap of more, that trap of comparison, it's a lie. But so often we believe if I just had more stuff, if I just had more money, if I just had more sex, then I'd be satisfied. I mean, more. I need more. Whatever it is, if I just had that corner office, if I just had that fancy sports car, if the Browns just had a winning season, like they don't need to hit the playoffs. I mean, just a quarterback who threw more touchdowns than interceptions. Don't hold your breath. It's not happening this year, okay? But, you don't need everything. You just need more. He goes on, I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for all my toil. Then I considered all that my hands had done and the toil I had expended in doing it, and behold, all was vanity and striving after the wind. And there was nothing to be gained under the sun. See, he recognizes that there's inherent pleasure in some things, and that there's value in that pleasure, and that ultimately the grace of God is what allows us to experience the pleasures of life. It's a gift of God to be able to be satisfied in a job well done. Man, you haven't experienced the pleasure of God until you've built a deck with your friends out back, and you just have that moment where you're like, man, it is finished. Feel like God on the third day, okay? It is finished. It's amazing pleasure that God has graced us with. But he says that pleasure was never meant to satisfy life's deepest problems, life's deepest questions, the things that keep us up at night, the things that we're afraid to talk about, the things that we maybe share with our spouse in the down times, but man, when we're cruising at 30,000 feet, we just never broach the subject. He says pleasure was never meant to satisfy that. Pleasure and achievement, they're good things, but if you treat pleasure like the solution to those problems, specifically death, man, they are total failures. I have never seen a hearse with a luggage rack, right? If you have, you might be the first person, but man, we die and our stuff gets left, our family fights over it, somebody else gets it, you got to sell the car to a friend of the family so your family doesn't even fight about it. We should enjoy things, we should enjoy life, but pleasure never gives meaning to our existence. Not in that sense. And here's the real kicker about pleasure, I'll tell you this. If you live for pleasure alone, your enjoyment will, I'm going to say this specifically, your enjoyment will eventually decrease unless the intensity of your pleasure increases. If you live for pleasure alone, your enjoyment will eventually decrease unless the intensity of your pleasure increases. If you live for sex, you're going to want more sex. You're going to want varied sex, different people, different partners, more, all the time. If you live for achievement, there will never be enough titles to satisfy you. You'll be vice president and president and CEO, and it'll never be enough. You'll get to the top and find out that the ladder was a lie and that it was empty, that stuff doesn't satisfy. Side note, 50 Shades of Grey is in Redbox now. We did a series on that. I would encourage you, please don't rent the movie. You don't need that for your spirituality. It is not, there's nothing good coming out of that. But that is a perfect example of this twisted view of pleasure for filling life's deepest needs. It's a search for something to make a person happy, to make a person whole, and to feeling and love, and it is a empty path. Your enjoyment will eventually decrease unless the quality or quantity of your experience increases. If you're an alcoholic, if you drink booze or take pills, you get numb to the effects. And the experience that you have, it'll decrease unless you up the dosage, unless you start drinking more. There was a time, I won't say that one, that's not appropriate, never mind. So if you go through the passage and you note how many times that the writer, he says in this, myself, I was seeing how many times I could make myself happy, and I was pursuing pleasure so that it would satisfy me. It's astounding. This is like the gospel he's presenting. We believe in the New Testament in the gospel of grace, the gospel of Jesus Christ, but the gospel that he presents in this passage is a gospel of selfishness. It's a mantra of me. What can I do? How can I satisfy myself? And so much of our culture is lined up for this. So much of our culture, that's what people believe. That's what your coworkers, your friends, for the majority of them, that's what they're living for. They're living for me. And when you pursue that path, it leads to emptiness. Yet Jesus Christ, he said this. In the New Testament, what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his soul? The world tells us one thing. The world says you need more stuff. Consumerism, mass marketing, every commercial I've ever seen. I heard a radio commercial the other day. It said the new thing that they were promoting was a 2-year lease on your car. Now, I'm not Dave Ramsey, but a 2-year lease on your car is a terrible strategy because that means you will be chained to a car payment for eternity. You will never own it. It's like renting a car, and it'll smell cool, but man, you are paying out the nose, okay? So, my rant on consumerism. And everything we see, every advertisement, every commercial, every television show, even when you go to your friends' houses and you sort of covet their granite countertops or even just nicer laminate than you have, it's built on this idea that stuff can satisfy. And there's a little tiny lie that the enemy plants that says, you know what, if you had that would be that one piece, your life is pretty good, but if you had granite, I think this could go over the top. I think this could be it. Yet Jesus' message is radically different. Jesus' message is opposite. He says that stuff can't satisfy, or that it can satisfy temporarily, but it can't satiate, that it can never meet that need so full that you have no other needs. There's no amount of money that you will ever reach. There's never been a person who's reached an amount of money where they said, you know what? I'm good. I think I'll just call it a day. Mark Zuckerberg, who is probably the richest person, I'm not sure. Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook, right? Billionaire, 30 years old. He's still trying to make Facebook better. He's still trying to reach a higher level. He has more money in his bank account than the city of Cleveland combined. I mean, just an unfathomable amount. And he's still searching for more. Stuff can't satisfy. It can't satiate long term because it was never meant to meet that need. Would you bow your heads? I'm going to read a quick quote from C.S. Lewis in closing. C.S. Lewis, he says this, he says, creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires exists. A baby feels hunger, and there's such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim, and there's such a thing as water. Men and women feel sexual desire, and there's such a thing as sex. If I find in myself a desire which no experience in the world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for more. If none of my earthly pleasures satisfy it, that does not prove that the universe is a fraud. Probably the earthly pleasures were never meant to satisfy it, but only to arouse it, to suggest a picture of the real thing. If that's so, I must take care, on the one hand, never to despise or be unthankful for the earthly blessings, and on the other, never to mistake them for something else of which they are only a kind or a copy, an echo or a mirage. I must keep alive in myself the desire for my true country, which I shall not find till after death. I must never let it get snowed under or turned aside. I must make it the main object of my life to press on to that country and to help others do the same. At the end of the day, there's no amount of stuff that can fill the emptiness in your life, because that emptiness was designed to be fit by the love of Christ and the hope and the purpose and the plan that you can only find when you find yourself in Him. There comes a time in the life of a Christ follower where you experience this, where you are filled with the Holy Spirit of God, and it's like there's a stream of living water flowing from within you. But over time, what can happen is many of us, we lose it. Many of us, like the book of Revelation talks about, we lose our first love. Maybe we still follow Christ, but it's just not the same. There's just something that sort of lapses with time. And it's natural, but God has more for you. If you're here today and you would say, you know what, I'm not where I need to be. I'm not where I used to be. Even worse than not being where I need to be, I'm not where I used to be. I want to encourage you today to take time to acknowledge where you are, to think about where you want to be, and to choose today to take a stand, to move forward, to throw in the towel and say, Jesus, I'm sick of searching for stuff. I'm sick of living my life like the rest of the world. I want to be different. I want to be filled with the love of Christ in a way that impacts not only my own life, but the lives of those around me. If that's you today and you're struggling with any of those things, or you want to make that decision, I want to pray for you. Nobody's looking around. It's a safe place. And if that's you, just slip up your hand so I know. So I pray for you today. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All over this room, there are hands. We live our lives, so many of us. We think other people are on different paths or other people are doing better, but the reality is we are all on a journey with Christ. Heavenly Father, I pray from this day forward that we would take steps intentionally from where we are to where we want to be. I pray, God, that the allure of stuff would be diminished in our lives, that you would empower us through your Spirit, that you would fill us with your Spirit, that we would enjoy life, that we would find pleasure in the things that you have created that you called good, God, but that ultimately our hope and our purpose and our future would be found in you. Because, Jesus, that makes all the difference. Heavenly Father, for each and every person who raised their hand specifically, Jesus, I pray that you would give them strength to do the things that you're calling them to do. I pray, God, that you would encourage them specifically, uniquely, put them in relationships with friends who they can have accountability. So often we go through lives without it. We're missing out on the power of the body of Christ to hold up one another, to encourage one another, to challenge one another to greater peaks and greater levels of relationship than we've ever experienced. In the name of Jesus, the strong Son of God, I pray today as we leave this place that we would be blessed, filled with your Spirit, that you would empower us to have relationships and take a stand for things that truly matter, God, that we would find on this quest what life is truly for. Amen.
We hope you enjoyed this week's video podcast. To attend one of our actual services, please visit our website for service times and location. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, Twitter, and subscribe to our Vimeo channel. Please return for our next week's video podcast.